Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to put out guides to challenges in the Archnemesis League. There are 40 different challenges and some of them are much harder than others. This video is going to cover what I believe to be the 28 easiest challenges. So this is going to cover everything that you will need to consider if you're going for either 12 challenges or 24 challenges. If you're going for 32, 34, 36, 38 or 40, then you've probably figured most of these out already, but if you need some specific help with one of them, then this video should also help for that. There'll be a separate video coming later that will cover the 12 that I believe are the hardest ones, and who knows, maybe you'll do some of those on your path to 12 or 24 as well. Quick general notes about 12 challenges. Expect that you're going to need to clear Act 10 and then do about 50 maps after that once you're into proper endgame. You'll then need to do a couple of slightly out of the way things that might just be a little bit out of your way but that aren't too difficult, and this league is what I would term average difficulty for hitting 12 challenges. There's been a couple of leagues in the past where you've needed to play a lot further than 50 maps into endgame, but 50 maps is pretty normal for getting 12 challenges. For 24 challenges, you'll need to push a bit further than this. You'll need to push into red maps and probably take down the Searing Exarch and the Eater of Worlds on their easiest difficulty setting. You don't need to do harder bosses like Cyrus, Maven, Uber Elder, or the Searing Exarch or Eater of Worlds when they've got map mods present on them. You'll need to do a couple of hundred total maps and a few out-of-the-way encounters as well. This league is easier than usual to hit 24 in, and normal difficulty for 12. Are you planning on going further? If so, 32, 34, 36, 38 and 40 challenge video is mostly written and should follow quite soon. I've got a few notes on my blog as well as this presentation, so you can download that if you want. This is what I would term the easiest 40 challenge league since Blight League, and all of the reward milestones past 24 are more achievable than similar numbers of challenges have been in most past leagues. So firstly, there are 7 that you will get in the axe without even trying. Firstly, skill up. This requires you to equip 6 skill gems. Now note that this is skill gems, this is not support gems. So you'll need to have 6 skill gems, that's ones that you can either turn on and off or that you can cast. As soon as auras come online in Act 3 and cast when damage taken and similar trigger gem setups come online in Act 4, you'll probably get this without even trying. Archnemesis 1 is a tutorial for using the new mechanic. It's very self-explanatory and you really can't miss this one if you, unless you just deliberately run past everything related to the Archnemesis system in the entire game. Exile Vs World 1 requires you to open a strongbox, defeat a monster that's imprisoned with an essence, and kill a rogue exile. All of these start appearing very early in progression. You'll encounter all of them in Act 1, and you'll probably have all of these without trying to by the time you have killed Vaal in Act 1. Act Bosses 1 and 2 and Personal Map Device are things you just can't miss. This just requires you to progress through the core storyline of the game. Act Bosses 1 requires you to kill Act 5 Kitava, Act Bosses 2 requires you to kill Act 10 Kitava, and then Personal Map Device requires you to kill 1 map boss, and that's all you need to do in order to get that. So by the time you've got your first map done, you've completed all of these, you can't miss it. Exile Vs World 2 requires a couple of rarer encounters and things that come online later, but they're still very common. You'll need to pass through a Delirium Mirror from Act 5 onwards. These are in 4% of zones, and you will need to open an Abyss and complete the Abyss. They're in 8% of zones from Act 6 onwards, and you'll need to complete a heist contract. These are common drops from Act 6, and you will also get one that is a quest that you can keep retrying if you do fail it as well. So those ones are all basically free. The only thing it requires going out of your way at all is just doing one heist, but there'll be a quest that'll be there for you to do a heist, so you'll probably want to do it anyway. Next is Explore the Labyrinth. Now this is one that requires a little bit of messing around because of 2 of the things in here you might not get just when you're naturally playing through the labyrinth on your character. I know that I haven't got this challenge yet and I have completed the Achieve Ascension challenge in this league, and that's because I didn't think to do a silver key when I was doing my labyrinths. So, a silver key is mostly about remembering that you need to do it. Inside the labyrinth there are silver doors and silver keys. You'll need to loot a silver key, use it in a silver door, which will be in a different room to the one that the key is in, and then loot the chest that's inside that silver key room. It's very easy to do, it's just something that's very easy to forget to do as well. So just keep this one in mind while you're going through the labyrinth, and if you've already completed the labyrinth, then you can just go back massively over level and do this really fast in one of the easier labyrinths and get it out of the way straight away. For Darkshine, these are hidden in secret passages. When you see somewhere that your minimap says you can progress, but you actually can't progress, have a look around, you'll find a switch, pull that switch, and then you will be able to progress through there. To get 3 keys from Azaro. Azaro drops 1 key by default. He drops an additional one if you've had a specific Dark Shrine go off. There is a Dark Shrine that causes Azaro to drop an additional key on death. It is a very common reward from Dark Shrines, and it's actually one players are generally pretty unhappy to get because it's one of the weakest, but it will make this challenge easier. Then you get extra ones by enraging Azaro. The way that you enrage Azaro varies with the actual type of Azaro fight that you've got. Most of the time, you can complete this challenge by just killing Azaro as quickly as possible, and then making sure that you also do all of the Dark Shrines in the lab. And most of the time, you'll enrage him once by doing that, so you'll be successful once. There are a couple of mechanics you can't do this with, and if you're interested in more information on exact mechanics of how the labyrinth works, there's a useful resource on the website poelab.com. That tends to have a layout for the labyrinth every day, and also a whole bunch of other information that's useful, such as exactly how to make, for instance, Azaro, how to enrage him and get an extra key when something like the conduits option is up. Vaal side areas is next. This is very straightforward, but a small detour. You're just going to need to do 5 of these zones. You can do them in the axe, you can do them in maps as per your preference. They have an 8% base chance to spawn. Very important warning. If your character deals direct damage to enemies, so then damage over time, read the modifiers during the axe. Sometimes these zones will have monsters reflect elemental damage, or monsters reflect physical damage. This can result in your character actually one-shotting yourself through reflect. Maps versions of Vaal side areas can't have these mods. They have a different mod pool, but the ones that you find in the campaign can, and they will be a little bit nasty if you get them. Well Hydrated is next, and this is the game reminding you that you need to upgrade your flasks. Baubles are a little bit rare, so getting quality on all your flasks can take a few. Remember that a scoured flask only requires 4 Glassblower's baubles to get to maximum quality, whereas a unique flask requires 20 and a magic flask requires 10. If you're short on baubles, then vendors will sell you one bauble for 8 whetstones. I think it's 8, it might be 7. It's a bunch of whetstones, but whetstones drop like crazy these days, so you'll have no trouble getting that. Even just by the time that you're reaching maps, you'll start having a huge stash of whetstones. Enkindling and Instilling Orbs are the easiest way to add an enchantment to a flask, and they start coming online about monster level 68. You should try and mess around with these a bit, and you can remember that you can remove an unwanted enchantment at the crafting bench, but these orbs are definitely worth experimenting with if you've never used them before. They were added 2 patches ago, and they're really quite good. Exile Vs World Part 3 is the next challenge we want to talk about. This is all in maps, but it's stuff that you should get by the time you've done your 30th map. So Legion and Metamorph encounters appear in 8% of maps. Expedition encounters are the same, but they also appear in Acts 8 to 10. If you like one of these encounters a lot, then there are ways that you can spec heavily into them on your Atlas as well. And so the more that you progress through the Atlas passive system, the more of the Atlas you unlock, the more that you will be able to spec into one of these, if you've got one that's your favourite, or the more that you can generalize and spec into a bunch of different ones. Run 30 maps and you will pretty much certainly have all 3 of these encounters found. Additionally, maybe you will find that you really like one of these encounters. Maybe you're one of the people that really likes Legion encounters, and then in that case, maybe you've found something that is worth your while speccing into heavily. Archnemeses 2. Now this is a 24 challenges only one. This requires you to kill all 27 different types of Archnemesis monsters that can drop. So here it's all about Opulent. All of the rest of them are pretty common, but Opulent is genuinely rare. Now when I say that the rest are pretty common, some of them are a bit rarer, like Soul... There's a Soul something, and there's a couple others that are at the rarer end, but Opulent is genuinely rare, and that's because it can only drop from monsters with one of 3 modifiers. The first one is Wealthy. There is nothing you can do to increase your chances of encountering a rare monster that has the Wealthy affix, so we're just going to forget that one's an option. The second one is Keepers of the Trove. This is 3 times as likely to appear if you have a Bloodlines map. So that's a map that has X% more magic monsters, and magic monsters in area have a Bloodlines mod. Then there's Inner Treasure, which is 3 times as likely to appear with Nemesis, which is increased rare monsters, and rare monsters in areas have a Nemesis mod. So these 2 are the ones that you can target. If you prioritize running maps that have one of these 2 mods, you will get more opulence than you otherwise would. It's been my experience that I get one opulent about every 120 maps that I've been running, and whilst your experience may vary, this doesn't feel like it's an unreasonable one to get on your pathway to 24. I haven't been going out of my way to optimise the number of magic or rare monsters on maps, just beyond adding extra monsters. The other thing that seems to help with this is Harbinger encounters, so use your rusted Harbinger scarabs and things like that to add a few extra Harbingers on. That should add a lot of extra magic monsters to the map, which will then help you find these specific monsters, which will then potentially drop opulent. It's not guaranteed that when you do find a Keeper of the Trove pack that you will get an opulent from it, but it's just moderately likely. Now, opulent is not particularly valuable, not particularly useful. You can use it frivolously. There is a little exception if you're in Trade League. You might be able to sell a portal to a map where you're going to be fighting an opulent encounter. You might be able to negotiate with another player that needs this to get a challenge really badly. Then you might be able to negotiate a deal whereby they give you, say, 20 Chaos Orbs and you give them a portal into your map and you both get credit for killing the opulent monster. You can do that if you want. I haven't bothered with this one. I'm more likely to do that with some of the ones that are much more effort to set up, like Archnemesis in Monsters 3, which is not going to be in the pathway to 24. Power Overwhelming is next. Now, this one requires you to get a skill gem that is supported by 6 support gems. There are easy ways to do this, there are hard ways to do this. The hard way to do it is to use Ulnatol's Vaal, the ultra rare amulet that drops only in enhanced breachstones. Or the easy way is to find this one chaos item that no one ever wants, Bitter Dream. It's a scepter that drops like candy, and it's like one of the most common uniques in the game. No one ever wants it. It's not on your loot filter, so go and add it to your loot filter. You'll find this thing, it's not very rare, and you will then be able to socket a Vortex in it. Once you've socketed Vortex on it and equipped it to your character, you're done. You've completed Power Overwhelming, because Vortex can get the benefits of all 6 of these support gems. So even though that wouldn't be any use as an actual combat setup, it's still enough to get you this challenge done. Or in my case, I didn't have a Vortex handy, I just socketed in Wave of Conviction, realised that wasn't going to work because Bone Chill actually can't support Wave of Conviction, and so then I added in increased critical strike support, and that was enough for me. Enchanted Arsenal is next. Now, the Path of Least Resistance here, this requires you to equip 5 enchanted items in 5 different item slots. The helmet, the gloves, and the boots, as you do your first 3 labyrinths on your character, just throw them on whatever item you're wearing at the time. Then use Cassia to anoint an amulet, which you're going to want to do anyway, and also use Cassia to anoint a ring, which you're not necessarily going to do, but you can just, unless you want to focus on Blight a bit, but there's no cost to it really at all. Alternatively, if you run Grand Heists at all that are bunkers, records offices, or mansions, they will always drop enchanted weapons and armor, and these can be very, very good. They have favourable links, they have excellent rolls, and so you will get some really good items out of those. So if you do find one of those blueprints, then by all means go and run it. And that may mean that you don't need to do quite as many of the things that were on the original Path of Least Resistance here. There is one other option, Enchanted Belts. They are much harder to get your hands on. They require that you complete the Uber Duber Labyrinth, i.e. the Monster Level 83 Labyrinth. One of those 3 will allow you to enchant a belt. That's something that I think is beyond most players whose goal in the league is getting 24 challenges done. Doing the Enriched Eternal Labyrinths is fairly difficult. And whilst certainly something to give a go to, remember that you do need to beat Azaro 3 times in them without dying. Otherwise, you won't get any of those rewards from them. So that's an option, but I think most people will skip that one and will go with the Path of Least Resistance instead. Kirac Missions is next. Now, you know there's sometimes a challenge that has 2 really hard options in it, but you don't need to do those, you can ignore them and you can do everything else and get credit for it. This is one of them. You need to do 6 different types of Kirac missions out of 8 that are presented. One of them is Defeat the Conqueror. That's something that is probably going to be beyond most people that are going for 12 challenges and will be a challenge for people going for 24. Then there's also Defeat the Breachlord, which is something that takes a fair bit of setup. However, the other 6 are all really easy. And as long as you skip those 2, you will have no trouble getting this one done. It may even be on your pathway to 12, although I think for a lot of people, this will be like their 13th or 14th or 15th challenge, something that will often be a little bit past your pathway to 12, but will be on your path to 24. But definitely keep this in mind as an option if your goal is 12 too. Quality equipment is next. There's a lot of options here. You need to raise the quality of an armor or weapon beyond 27. So you can use a perfect fossil. This is a bit RNG, but you can sometimes get there. You can use the Beastcraft that corrupts an item and renders it 30 quality. You can deal with Hillock in either Fortification or Transportation, and he will allow you to upgrade a weapon without corrupting it to 28 quality if Hillock is a 3-star general, and 30 quality if Hillock is a 3-star general and you defeated Katarina. Or you can use a Heist Replica base axe that has 20% quality implicit on it. Note that just looting a 30 quality unique off the ground won't give you credit for this. I don't have credit for this yet, even though I've had several 30 quality items drop for me in Heist. Ascend and reach level 90. Now we're starting to get to the ones that are probably not going to be on your pathway to 12, although these are ones that you definitely could do in your first 12. I believe for me, Ascend was actually my 12th challenge this league. The 4th Labyrinth is a huge power boost, so you're going to want to do this anyway. 24 only, this is listed as 24 only because I feel like for intermediate and beginner players, the 4th Labyrinth is a fairly difficult encounter. So it's something that veteran players are very used to. We know the ins and outs of the Labyrinth. We know how to fight Azaro. We get this done smoothly and easily, and often on quite weak characters at the very start of a league. But for someone that's a bit newer to the game, Azaro can be pretty overwhelming, and so this can be one that you might feel is at the harder end, but it will definitely be on every pathway to 24. Level 90 is a very similar challenge as well, so I'm bundling it in here. If you're dying too much, remember that you can always just run scoured content for a while. There is no shame in saying, hey, I'm dying too much in these tier 11 maps that are rolled with an alchemy orb and a Vaal orb. I'm just going to run some scoured tier 10s. And whilst you will get a little bit less XP from that, it's not actually all that much less XP, and you'll be dying a lot less. That can help you very easily push up from 88 to 89, 89 to 90, when the death penalty starts feeling a little bit more impactful in the game. Now we're going to jump to the ones that you only do on your pathway to 24. So I'm assuming that most people that are going for 12 will probably have already got their 12 by this point. However, these are all straightforward ones. They're really basic. They don't take much explanation. They're just go and do this, 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 and this. They just require a higher power character or a bit more progression on your Atlas in order for me to recommend them on a pathway to 12. So Eldritch Power is first. This requires you to use 6 of the new currency orbs, but this is the 6 that drop like candy on influenced maps. You'll have absolutely no trouble looting these once you start running both Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds influenced maps, and you will get these currencies. It'll take you a little bit of time to get all of them, but it won't take you all that long. Boons of the Atlas 1. This one's straightforward but takes speccing into specific Atlas nodes. Nothing here can be done without the relevant node, so you will not find a Covetous Shrine in normal gameplay. You will not find a monster imprisoned by a Deafening Essence in normal gameplay. You'll need to do a couple of things in order to spawn these, but mostly it's about having the right nodes on your Atlas, and then you can unspec these nodes later if you don't think that you like them. Now, Deafening Essence is the only one that's not straightforward, that's not just a case of do this encounter with X node equipped. And that requires Amplification, which then grants +1 tier to all essences. And then when you have an essence monster that rolls Shrieking naturally without being corrupted, if you apply a Remnant of Corruption to it, you'll have a 1 in 3 chance of it then upgrading further to becoming a Deafening Essence. And at that point, fantastic, that's all you need in order to complete the Boons of the Atlas 1, release a Deafening Essence imprisoned monster. Unique maps is an interesting one. This is not something that I would normally have recommended on a path to 24, at least for solo self-found players in the past. However, Kirac Missions make it much easier, especially if you spec into the node that grants comprehensive reports, comprehensive scouting reports having a 20% chance to replace other scouting reports that will drop. If you do that, then Kirac Missions will be an absolute fountain of unique maps, including the rarest ones in the game like Doriani's Machinarium. You'll be able to get every single one of the unique maps this way, with the exception of Vinctar Square, and Vinctar Square you can skip for this challenge. Vinctar Square though is perhaps worth doing, and you just need to vendor all 4 different Agnerod staves for it. They're all tier 3 rarity uniques, so a bit on the uncommon side, but it's not all that difficult to get a Vinctar Square, it's just a lot of hassle. Alternately, just skip that map because who can be bothered with it? Allocate Atlas passives is the last in this category, and this will come in natural gameplay before you complete your 250th map, so I feel it'll be on people's pathway to 24, because I'm expecting most of you will do 300 odd maps on your path to 24. So vendor recipes is next. This is 24 only, and it's knowledge-based and requires obscure recipes. This will be on your pathway to 12, except for one thing, and that's the Exalt Shard recipe. So firstly, for move speed boots, you need scoured boots plus a quicksilver flask plus an augmentation orb. There are alternative versions of this. You can use movement speed boots that are magic or rare and that are no higher than 25% move speed, and repeat this recipe and you will get a higher tier and it'll be magic. So there's a bunch of things you can do there, but that's the simple one. Just start with scoured boots, a quicksilver flask, and an augmentation orb, and you will receive back a 10% run speed boots. For a scouring orb, you need to waste a regal orb on a 1 mod magic item. When you vendor a 2 mod magic item, it vendors to a scouring orb. You can also do this by wasting an element orb on a 3 mod jewel, but that's more expensive than wasting a regal. For a jewel, you need to vendor 5 rare jewels that have the same base. There are a couple of other oddball recipes you can use here, like you can vendor Primordial Might, Primordial Harmony, and the other Primordial jewel, and then when you do that, you will receive back the unique jewel, the Anima Stone, but that's much harder to get your hands on than 5 rare Viridian jewels, or 5 rare medium cluster jewels. Something that's very important here is that when you vendor these, you will receive back the item level equal to the lowest item level that you inputted. This is useful to know for purposes of cluster jewels in particular. It's generally the case that almost no one wants to use large cluster jewels that have exactly 10 passives on them, and people will only use 9 or 11 passive ones as budget substitutes for better ones that they can't afford. So they will either want 8 passives or 12, they will use 9 as an, oh yeah, this is a budget fix until I can afford an 8, or they'll use 11 until they can afford a 12. But 10 is generally useless, and 9 and 11 are much worse than 8 and 12. For that reason, you can vendor a lot of your cluster jewels that have, large cluster jewels that have 9, 10, or 11 passives, and that can be a good use for them. If you vendor 5 rare cluster jewels that are all 9, 10, or 11, you'll get 1 back at random, which will be rare, unidentified, and will be between 8 to 12 respectively. So, you know, you've got a 40% chance of getting something that's meaningfully better than any of your inputs were. So that's something to keep in mind there as an option, especially in Trade League, but even in SSF that can be useful. But that's the recipe in question. Hybrid Flask. Life and Mana Flasks is the same tier plus a Fusing Orb, or alternately, 3 of the same tier of Hybrid Flask will give you the next tier up. Hybrid Flasks have really fallen out of favour in Path of Exile over the years, and they were never particularly popular. They've had occasional niche uses, but they're very seldom used, so people forget they exist, and that's why this challenge is here, just as a reminder, hey, this vendor recipe exists. For Exalt Shards, here you need to perform a chaos recipe, so you need to sell an item for every inventory slot on your character. So this means 2 rings, 1 amulet, 1 belt, one two-handed weapon, or 2 one-handed weapons, or 1 two-handed weapon and a shield. Note that you do not need a quiver if you're using a bow. So if you're vendoring a bow, that just counts as a two-handed weapon. Then you need a set of body armor. Then you need a gloves, boots, and helmet. So this is what we term a chaos recipe set. It's a full set of items, all of which are rarity. Now, they all need, if you vendor this in normal play, you will receive, depending on the lowest item level among them, a Chance Orb, a Chaos Orb, or a Regal Orb. However, if all of them are influenced and they all share the same influence, then in that case you will receive 2 Exalt Shards instead. The easiest way to farm a set of influence gear is to use Shaper Scarabs or Elder Scarabs. In trade, these are very cheap this league, and additionally, no one wants them. There's good reasons no one wants them, and so ultimately, they're something that you'll easily be able to get your hands on if you're in trade. But even in solo self-found, you'll have a bunch of these start dropping once you get into red maps and start doing especially Eater of Worlds content. Eater of Worlds content drops a lot of Scarabs, so you will just get some Shaper Scarabs incidentally. Go and throw them in your maps, and when you do that, look around for these pieces and loot them, and eventually you'll have a full set, you'll vendor it for Exalt Shards, and then you'll be fine. Now, just remember that they all need to be the same influence. There are other ways you can do the Exalt Shard recipe. You know, you can use Conqueror maps, and you can also use Expedition can be really good for getting Conqueror influenced items, but I think it is easiest with Shaper Scarabs or Elder Scarabs in this league. For a 6-socket item, you can use the Lore Weave recipe of vendoring 60 unique rings. Or you can take any of the various recipes that force one mod onto a two-handed weapon, such as +1 fire skills that can be used on any caster weapon, or you can use plus physical damage, and force that onto an item that is already six-socketed. You might also be able to use the 3-for-1 recipe on a tabula rasa. I haven't tested that, so I don't know if that'll work or not. Next up is Eldritch Altars. This is 24 only, and this almost can't be avoided once you're in high-tier yellow maps. You'll start seeing these Eldritch Altars in every map that is either Searing Exarch or Eater of Worlds influenced, and the game will give you quests that will tell you, hey, go and do these Eater of Worlds maps, go and do these Searing Exarch maps. And once you're doing those, Eldritch Altars will come for free because the numbers on it are so small. Atlas Bosses 1 is next. This requires you to beat two fairly difficult bosses. Well, one of them is difficult, the Black Star, which is the one that's pictured here. She's pretty nasty. And also the Infinite Hunger. The thing with these, though, is that you get to practice them. You get to fail them, and then you get to go straight back in. All you need to do if you fail one of these, and when I say fail, I mean like lose all 6 portals in an attempt, because you die 6 times, all you need to do is then just do one more map of an appropriate tier, and you'll get another attempt at it. So that makes it really easy to get back in the action and keep trying on these fights until you get them down. I had an enormous amount of fun, the most fun I've had in Path of Exile in years, learning the Black Star, just going in there with no hints whatsoever and just saying, you know what, I'm going to figure out how the mechanics of this fight work, and I'm going to get it down no matter what it takes. Ultimately, these fights are both a lot easier if you have overwhelming damage amounts. Whereas I did the Black Star with something like 150,000 DPS, if you do it with 500,000, you will have no trouble with it. So next up we have Archnemeses 4. So this one requires you to kill all of the manufactured Archnemeses in the game. This will pretty much require looking up an Archnemesis recipe sheet, although you can actually get all of this information in-game because of the changes that were made to how undiscovered recipes show up. Making Innocence is an ordeal. Making Katava is an ordeal. Killing Effigy is an ordeal. These are the 3 that are going to be the biggest work in this one. However, all these are very doable with an hour or 2 of effort. For Effigy, you need to do this fight in a low tier map and use only damage over time effects, even if your character is not spec'd for it. This is because of the awkward reflect mechanics that are linked to the Effigy Archnemesis. This is one of the most brutal encounters GGG's produced in a long time. So even if your build is not spec'd for damage over time at all, just use damage over time and do this in a tier 1 map or even in the Axe, and then you'll find that the monster will have a lot less hit points, which means that you'll be able to get credit for killing it much more easily. In general, you should run sketchy encounters, like Innocence can be quite hard, as can not the Brine King so much. The Brine King can be pretty nasty as well. A lot of these you might want to consider running them in either scoured maps or in lower tier maps. I know that when I wanted to do Innocence and when I wanted to do Lunaris and Solaris together in order to make Innocence, I actually did those in scoured maps just so it was like, alright, I'm not going to fail this, because it's so much work that's gone into producing that setup. Note that we've skipped Archnemeses 3. The reason for that is that Archnemeses 3 is 34 plus only. It's one of the most effort-inducing, or like one of the most extreme, go out there and do something weird encounters in this league's entire list of challenges, and it's going to take quite a while to do. Atlas Bosses 2 is next. Unlike the first version, you can use the training version and just keep trying at the fight until you master it. This is easier than Atlas Bosses 1 was, because the Black Star is by far the hardest of the new bosses to beat. However, you need to beat the Black Star in order to get access to the Searing Exarch, so it's not like you can do Atlas Bosses 2 first, even though it is easier. And next we have the last one. Now this is Trade League players only. If you're an SSF, this is going to be your 37th or 38th challenge. So Jewel Master requires you to equip 5 different types of jewels. You need to equip a classic jewel, so Cobalt, Viridian, or Crimson. You need to equip an Abyss jewel. You need to equip a cluster jewel. All of that is easy. You then need to equip a prismatic jewel. There are only 2 options for this in the game. You can either equip a Watcher's Eye, which drops from Uber Elder, or you can equip an Anima Stone. Anima Stone drops from some other ridiculous thing. That's from vending 3 different unique jewels, one of which is tier 2 rarity. So for that reason, you're probably not going to get that part easily. That said, killing Elder for a Watcher's Eye or Uber Elder, Elder and Uber Elder is going to be easier than the next part, because the last part is you need to equip a Timeless Jewel. If you're in solo self-found, getting a Timeless Jewel is very RNG heavy and requires a lot of Legion farming. If your goal is to get this challenge done, you should be focusing on Legion a lot so that you get lots of attempts at the Domain of Timeless Conflict so that you can then find a Timeless Jewel. Because those things are pretty rare, unless you are really heavily specced into the Domain of Timeless Conflict. Now, I got lucky. I got one on my first Legion encounter for this league, but if I was in solo self-found, I wouldn't have done that Legion encounter yet because I still haven't had enough splinters. So yeah, this one's an absolute mongrel if you're an SSF. But if you're in Trade League, like I am, just trade for a Watcher's Eye that's okay on your build but not in hot demand, then trade for any old Timeless Jewel, equip them, and then unequip them and you're done. Alternately, just leave the Watcher's Eye equipped because it's one of the best unique items in the game. Of course, you can trade for a great Watcher's Eye or a great Timeless Jewel if you can afford it and if it fits in your build well. Anyway, that's all I got on this. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.